Okay, so that last video, that example, was how showing how operant conditioning works in real life, how it operates in real life. And so just to kind of reiterate that this is learning based on our voluntary behavior, and it's called operant conditioning because we learn based on how our behavior operates on the environment. So we only learn by doing something. It's not just a passive association. So with the Big Bang Theory video, Penny had to do something. So she had to quiet herself or go out into the hallway, and then that behavior was reinforced with the chocolate. And so if Penny hadn't acted in any way, she wouldn't have been reinforced. And so that's kind of the key of operant condition. It's based on our own voluntary behavior. So the basic principles behind operant conditioning were first described by a man named Thorndike. So Thorndike had a puzzle box, and he put a cat inside with food outside the box where the cat could see it. And the only way out of the cage was by pressing a lever. So the first time Thorndike put the cat in, the cat engaged in a lot of behaviors that would normally, in a natural setting, have resulted in the cat getting out of the box and getting the food. The cat pawed at the side of the box, pawed at the ceiling, pawed at the floor. Then the cat just happened to brush against the lever and the trapdoor opened. Because the cat didn't necessarily press the lever the first time, the cat may not have understood what he or she did to get the trapdoor to open. So it took the cat a little while to figure it out. But as Thorndike repeatedly put the cat in, the cat started pushing the lever sooner and sooner until eventually the cat seemed to get that that's how to get the food. So the cat learned. And so the important thing here is that the cat tried a bunch of different behaviors like pawing at the ceiling and the floor to try to get out, and none of that worked. And then he did one thing, touched the lever, and then that opened the door. And so that behavior soon got reinforced. So the behavior of pressing the lever led to the door opening, and that was a reward. And so that behavior was reinforced, and the cat engaged in the behavior sooner to get out. So here's a graph showing the time in seconds that it took for the cat to get out and get the food. So first, when the cat was first put in the box, it took them like 150 seconds to get out. So they tried a bunch of different things and it didn't work. And so it took them a while. But then the next time they were put in the box, they were a little bit faster and a little bit faster. And then over time, they learned that pressing the lever was what they needed to do to get the food. And so you'll see that as learning occurred, pretty soon the cat went in and pushed the lever to get the food. And so this is how we can train animals to do things. And so this is how in that video you watched how the dog learned to go get the beer for his owner, or all the other animals, some of those tricks that they learned. It's because through exploring different behaviors, when they finally get one behavior right that leads to a certain outcome, and that outcome is rewarding, it reinforces that behavior. And so the animal learns to do that behavior to get that reward. Okay, so this in operant conditioning is based on this law of effect. And so the law of effect says that if a behavior is followed by a reward, that will increase the behavior. And so, for example, if a child reaches up to you to get picked up, and that leads you to pick up the child, so that's a rewarding outcome for the child. So what's going to happen is that's going to reinforce this behavior, that specific behavior of the child reaching up to you, because that is the behavior that led to the reward. And so that is what you are reinforcing when you pick up the baby. Another example, so starting around like 5 p.m. every evening, my cat starts acting really cute. He'll rub up against me and tap on my arm to get my attention. He'll even sit on top of the book I'm trying to read. So at first I thought, oh, he loves me, but soon I realized that he had learned very quickly that if he is affectionate towards me, he'll be rewarded with dinner. So basically he learned to associate being affectionate with receiving food. This is an example of operant conditioning because the cat does a certain behavior, I reward the cat, and so that just reinforces that behavior. So in contrast to classical conditioning, operant conditioning involves more deliberate, consciously directed behavior. So effects that increase behavior are called reinforcement, and any internal or external event can increase a behavior. And so in this case, this picture here, the mother holding the baby is the reinforcer. So when we change our behavior in anticipation of a reinforcement, this is the principle of operant conditioning. So we behave in a certain way, we get a desired outcome, and then that will influence our future behavior. Okay, so operant conditioning has some terminology just in the same way that classical conditioning does. And so let's go over that terminology so you guys can learn that. So a consequence that increases the frequency of a behavior is called reinforcement. And so when you reinforce a behavior, you're increasing the likelihood that behavior will occur. So reinforcing my cat's behavior of being really affectionate toward me at dinner time, that's a behavior that I'm reinforcing. And there's two different kinds. There's positive and negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is adding something pleasurable or pleasant to the situation. And so if someone behaves in a certain way and you give them praise, that praise is a positive reinforcement. Or if you give them money and you pay them, that's a positive reinforcement. Or if your dog brings you the remote to your TV and you reward him with a treat or you pet him, that is a positive reinforcement. And so in all of those cases, you're adding something to the situation. A negative reinforcement is when you're removing something unpleasant. And so the net outcome is still positive. So you're still increasing the likelihood of the behavior, but you're doing so by removing something unpleasant. So an example of this might be, when you get into your car and you start driving and then there's that noise that goes on, the dinging reminding you to put your seatbelt on. So that dinging sound is really annoying. So then when you put your seatbelt on, it stops. And so that is an example of negative reinforcement because you're reinforcing the behavior of putting your seatbelt on, but it's doing so by removing an unpleasant stimulus. Okay, so here are some examples of reinforcement, and I want you to decide whether it's positive or negative. So is it adding something pleasant or is it removing something unpleasant? You have a headache, you take a painkiller, and then the headache goes away. The next time you have a headache, you take a pill again. So think about what is being reinforced. So the behavior of taking a pill, that is what's being reinforced. And so what is the reinforcement? Is it positive or negative? So in this case, it's negative because the consequence of the behavior is that the headache goes away. And so that is the removal of something negative. So you're reinforcing the behavior of taking the pill, and that behavior, the consequence of that is negative. Negative meaning it removes the headache. Okay, how about this one? You exercise, you feel the endorphins kicking in, making you feel good. You increase the frequency of exercise. So here the behavior that's being reinforced is exercise. Why is it being reinforced? What is the consequence of that behavior? Is it positive or negative? In this case, it's positive reinforcement because the consequence is the addition of these endorphins. How about this one? You exercise to avoid being overweight. So again, you're exercising. The exercise is this reinforced behavior, but the consequence of it is to avoid being overweight. This is an example of negative reinforcement. How about this one? A child turns in homework. The teacher places a fancy gold star on the homework. Now the child is more eager to complete his homework. So the behavior that's being reinforced is the child doing his homework. And the reason it's being reinforced is because the consequence of that behavior is receiving a gold star. And so here, this is positive reinforcement. Okay, so that's reinforcement. So punishment is also part of operant conditioning. And so this is when there's a consequence that decreases the likelihood that a behavior will occur again. So, and again, there's positive punishment and negative punishment. And so adding something unpleasant to the situation is going to be a net negative. So adding something unpleasant like spanking someone or locking them up in jail, although I guess that's taking away freedom, so maybe that's not a good example. But if you add something negative, like giving someone some aversive stimulus, like negative feedback or criticism, that will decrease the behavior. Negative reinforcement would be removing something pleasant, and that, again, the net outcome is negative, and so it will decrease the likelihood of the behavior. Here you could say that locking someone up in jail is a type of negative punishment because you're taking away their freedom. Similarly, like grounding someone or taking away their allowance, those are removing something pleasant, and the idea is that that will decrease the likelihood that the behavior will occur again. And so just note that punishment, like both positive and negative punishment, the overall outcome is negative, and so, or like the overall outcome will decrease the behavior because it's unpleasant. Whereas reinforcement, both positive and negative reinforcement, will increase the likelihood of a behavior. Okay, so here's an example. So is this positive or negative punishment? You can't go out with your friends. This is negative punishment because you're removing something pleasant. Extra chores around the house. This is positive punishment because you're adding something negative. No allowance. So this is negative punishment because you're removing something positive. So it's really about whether you're adding or removing something. Being yelled at, positive punishment because you're adding to the situation. So it's really about so you behave in a certain way and then there's a consequence. And so when you're thinking about whether it's positive or negative, think about the consequence. Are you adding something or taking something away? What is the consequence of your behavior? Is it adding or taking away something? Here's a nice little chart where you can think about whether the 4 different types. And so think about so a person behaves in a certain way and then there's a consequence. If the consequence causes the behavior to increase, it's going to be reinforcement. If the consequence causes the behavior to decrease, it's going to be punishment. If the consequence causes something to be added, it's positive. So whether it's adding something positive like praise or a gold star, or removing something unpleasant like removing a headache or that beeping sound in your car, that's positive. I'm getting these confused. So anytime something's added, it's positive. So positive reinforcement would be like adding a gold star. Positive punishment would be like hitting somebody or yelling at them. It's adding something unpleasant. Whereas negative reinforcement and negative punishment is removing something. So the consequence of the behavior means something is taken away. If you want to reinforce the behavior, you take away something negative, like the headache or the beeping in the car, something like that. Where if you want the behavior to decrease, you're going to remove something pleasant. So not letting someone go out with their friends. So take a look at this chart and see if you can quiz yourself to see if you can get these right, the 4 different kinds of outcomes for operant conditioning. Okay, and that is the end of this recording, and so we'll see you back with learning number 5.